as we count down to that potential signing of a phase one trade deal between the U.S. and China in Chile, there's still a question of where tariffs may be going forward. So far, the U.S. has publicly agreed not to raise tariffs this month and has indicated it won't implement that tariff hike that is planned for December. Do you think that is enough for China, or do we need to see maybe more concessions from the U.S. when it comes to tariffs?
Thank you to invite me to this dialogue. I think that for China, the position is very clear. If we can reach the trade and economic agreement between U.S. and China, the traffic which increased during this conflict of the trade should be reduced back to the previous level just before the conflict of the trade. I think the Chinese authority emphasized so many times.
And with other potential talking points still to be made in depth on the agricultural goods front, for example, sir, could China actually import $40 to $50 billion worth of farm goods from the U.S., considering that most of what they would buy would be soybeans, but the demand is dropping in China given what we're seeing with pigs, the pig population on the mainland?
And according to the information which people knowing that there is a framework that China will buy about, for example, 20 million tons of soybean and a certain amount of the pork. I think that if we look at the domestic demand, we should say that China is a big market. For example, for the soybean, in the year 2017, China imported nearly 100 million tons. Even last year, still China imported about 88 million tons of soybeans. And from this point of view, of course, China would like to continue to import the soybean from the country like the United States, Brazil, and other countries. And of course, you mentioned about the relatively weak of our demand for the soybean because of the declines of the pigs production. But I think that not only because the pig production, but there have other things. For example, in recent years, China promotes the domestic production of the soybeans. So they have additional supply from the domestic farmers. And of course, depends on the price of the soybeans. Some farmers choose another kind of the feedback, such like the corns, as a feedback which for the animal husbandry. So I think that they have some flexibility, but generally speaking, there is a demand. And of course, the amount about 40 to 50 billion US dollars agricultural products, particularly soybeans. In fact, now is the end of this year, so it can be delivered only, I think, in next year. Then, of course, it also depends on the price, such like whether it's a reasonable one compared with other countries.
Mr. Zhang, how badly hurt has the Chinese economy been so far from the trade war?
I think that, frankly speaking, because of the trade war, China's economy really got some pressure for his development, and also particularly for the export-oriented companies within mainly the coastal cities, coastal areas. And if you look at the overall situation, in fact, the trade war has a negative influence not only for China but for the whole world. For example, just months ago, the IMF, published his speculation about world economic development. You can see they reduced the previous prediction about the GDP increase globally to 3%, but for the world trade, its prediction is that for this year it's only 1.2%. So it's also same story for China, because the relatively weak international market and China as a world factory, of course, this kind of the, weak demand will have the influence on China's companies, which mainly for the export of the market, particularly in the United States. And now you can see the Statistical Bureau of China published the first 3 quarters economic and social development data. You can see the export of the China is not very strong, and the GDP increase rate in the 3rd quarter of the country is only 6%. So that really means that they have the great pressure. We recognize this. We need to do something to handle with this properly.
Well, certainly we've got slightly looser monetary policy. Do you think that government policy and central bank policy is enough where it is currently, or do you think more needs to be done? Do you think there needs to be more stimulus, for one thing?
And under this, pressure, of course, I think the Chinese government need to do the policy package for stimulating the economy. For example, the fiscal policy now is a relatively positive one. The more bond will be issued either in the local government level, in the company level, or in the central government level. And for the currency policies, you can see the Central Bank of China already, reduced the reserve ratio and also, reduced the basic lending ratio rate. That means that we can mobilize more financial resources to support the economies, particularly the small and medium enterprises. And of course, in fact, in China, investment also play a very important role for the economic development. And China still have a lot of the, shortcomings or backward side, such like the, public infrastructure, environment protection, poverty alleviation. And currently, we also see some new opportunity, such like the new generation of the mobile information technology, which also need huge amounts of investment. So through this kind of the package, I think that it can, in some extent to reduce the negative influence of this, not only the trade conflict between China and the United States, but the whole world slowdown of the economic development.